Uh, what is the spell? Let me just change
It's
it.
Armen with the E.
Okay. I take.
Armen is
I
another
just took it
Armenian
from.
name.
Okay.
Thanks.
Cool. We are live. Hey everyone. Welcome back to another episode of This is Tech Talks. And today we have a really special guest, Armin, with us. And we decided to talk about Rxjs because there it always comes to Rxjs, right? So whenever we are talking about Angular and we think, okay, what else? So Rxjs is one of the things which is hard to learn, but Armin will help us to understand how we can actually become better at it. So welcome, Armin, to the show, and thanks for joining
Hi
us.
everyone. Hi Santosh. Thanks for having me. So let's talk about Rxjs.
Mm.
um, this is a topic that I really love. I have a ton of articles about it, and usually when I think Angular, I think Rxjs at the same time because not only we know that not only it is built using with lots of Rxjs, but also it is something that really helps us kind of get our code better, and it also works in the sense of sharing the data, sending events, and everything that is really relevant in modern web applications. That all of that functionality can be covered and extended using Rxjs. So Rxjs is a really important topic, but it is sometimes overlooked when people learn when people start learning Angular.
So yes, so we will discuss more about the RxJS. So Armin, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. My name is Armen. I'm from Armenia. It's very, very convenient. I'm a GD for Angular, thanks to Santosh. So, and I work as a front-end engineer for it soon will be my seventh year, I think.
Mhm.
And I've been working on Angular since 2016, so I have some experience that I can try to share with everyone, hopefully.
Yeah, cool. So let's start with the introduction, Armin. So how you will describe RxJS to a new developer who don't know RxJS?
So the very first important thing to understand about Rxjs is that it's not a framework. It's a library. If you don't know anything about Rxjs, it's a library, kind of like Lodash or Moment.js, but those are somewhat specific. Rxjs is not very specific. Its specificity is working with streams. And when we think, well, what are streams? Usually, Rxjs fans will say, everything is a stream, and what they mean by that is that there are kind of like two models of data. One is the static data. For example, an object in JavaScript is just an object. We can change it, we can change its structure, we can delete it or do whatever we want with it. But whenever we change that, now we have discarded the previous value kind of, and now we have a new the same object, but it represents something different. Maybe some properties have changed or something. So there is no continuity between the object before and the object now. We don't receive any notifications. We cannot tell that someone has changed that object, right? uh, and sometimes it may be important for us to kind of have the ability to see the history or maybe react when something changes, and becomes problematic when we have global objects and different developers from different parts of application can write code that affects the same object. And then if some of that code has bugs in it, it would be very difficult to pin down where that is. What Rxjs does is it thinks about any sort of data that can change as a stream. What is a stream? An analogy that Rxjs developers often do is that it's like an array but spread in time, right? So it has values, but the values don't arrive immediately like we have with an array. They can arrive whenever they happen. Uh, I think it's a valid analogy, but a better way at looking at it is comparing to browser events. If you are doing JavaScript, it's very possible we are working with events like click events, focus events, different events. So Rxjs kind of works like in the same way. It's an object that sends us events, and the cool thing about Rxjs is that it essentially can present anything as a stream of events. For example, if we have well, browser events are one example, but other examples can be very specific events inside our application. For example, something arriving from WebSocket. It's really just a name that it's a message, but essentially it's an event. So how Rxjs works is that it's an object, it sends events. We can use the subscribe method to get those events in a callback, and do whatever we want with it. But Rxjs is deeper than that. Actually, the observable that we have in Rxjs, that's the object that sends events. It can be modified and turned into different kind of observable. For example, if you have an observable of some numbers, we can use special functions that are called operators in Rxjs. We can use those functions to transform that stream, that observable, to not to be just a stream of numbers, but only to be a stream of, say, odd numbers, for example, if you want to achieve something like that. And we can map those values, we can filter those values, we can accumulate those values over time or buffer them. For example, I want to receive um, those notifications, the numbers in our example, in like batches of 5. I can do that with an operator. I can buffer like 5, 5, 5, and receive arrays of that. And even cooler than that, I can combine different observable streams, which make sense in the same context, and receive values whenever one of them works, or receive values whenever two of them work, or even more. Or maybe every time one observable works, I want to also check some value from another observable. And so it allows me to kind of continuously monitor what happens with the data. Uh, I can do very big variety of functionalities using Rxjs. It's very popular in state management for Angular applications, for example. But we can, of course, it's a library. It's used in Angular, but we can extend it to use essentially in any JavaScript application. For example, I saw a very uh, cool feature in Nest.js, the Node.js framework, where when working with WebSockets, you could just return from one endpoint an observable to the client. And whenever from another part of the application that observable, for example, a subject, was given a new value, like with the next function, it would just transfer that value via the socket to the client. So in the backend, you didn't have to do any other, you didn't have to write any other code, just have the reference to the observable, and you could push anything to the client. And you could, if you are using Angular, you could use also an observable based implementation in on your client. So essentially, that will be just two observables, one in the backend, one in the front end, passing values to each other via a WebSocket connection. So it gives us a very wide range of approaches that we can use to solve like almost any problem.
That's brief introduction. So, and another question. This is something which a lot of developers face. So, whenever someone starts working with Rxjs, right, they get a lot of issues. I mean, they get into a lot of issues. So, what do you think? Why? I mean, of course, there. I mean, there are tons of libraries, but why Rxjs is a little bit difficult to understand?
I think the main challenge that developers face is because we usually adopt, especially if they are coming from Angular, we usually write OOP code, and we write lots of
Mm-hmm.
imperative code, which isn't bad itself. Some approaches, some algorithms out there, we really need to write code in that way. It's not like a competition. But because
Mm-hmm.
Rxjs is so much functional programming, I think that reading a bit about functional programming, how function compositions work, what are I don't know what is currying, piping functions, and everything. Like the theoretical part in the situation is very good. I think that this is something that, in the sense, OP and imperative code, for example, are very good in practice. When in I mean in the learning sense, you can write a class, add features, you can learn practicing. You can do the same with Rxjs, but it will be harder if you don't read the theoretical part, because you will miss out on lots of stuff. Uh, in lots of situations, people know that yes, this is how it works. So this is a stream. I know that I can subscribe to it and do whatever I want with the values. But of course, lots of situations we don't need to subscribe, or even if we do need to subscribe, some of the functionalities that we write in the subscribe callback can be achieved with operators. For example, if we want to write an if statement and perform something only if some condition is met on one of the emitted values, we don't need to write an if statement in the subscriber callback. We can just use the filter operator, filter out all the values that we don't need, and that is a transformation of an observable. That the cool thing of observables, we can transform uh, some observables into other observables using operators. So maybe the very first thing that I would advise to anyone who is trying to learn Rxjs, if you already know what a stream is, read some articles on functional programming, especially on JavaScript, because it's very popular among JavaScript developers. Uh, don't, if you're using Angular, don't shy reading articles about functional programming in React, because functional programming is a paradigm that works the same whether it's in Angular or in React or whatnot. And then start reading on operators. You can open the Rxjs documentation website, and they have a section where you can select what you want to do with observables. I really love that feature. It asks you several questions and come up with a function or a operator that will solve your problem. It kind of asks that do you have an observable, or do you want to create one? If you have, do you want to transform it or filter it or do whatever? And then it will suggest use this or this or this operator. So you can. It also helps you know more scenarios in which you can use Rxjs. So I really like that feature. I recommend you open the documentation if you're just learning and start doing that. Also, lots of operators have very intuitive names. Most of them, I mean, 80 to 90%. Some are very exotic names like window toggle, which isn't really saying much, but most of the operators are really intuitive names. So you can just also open the list of entities that are JSS functions and operators, and try to see how they work, try to experiment on them.
So last ask questions for you. Did you learn NGRX component store?
Yeah, I would expect that question. I tried to do something. I tried to do something with it, not at our project, but like separately on StackBlitz or something. I enjoyed it a lot. I think that I agree with what Lars was previously saying. I agree that it's kind of it's simpler, and um, it's easier to explain to newcomers than NGRX Store, but it's kind of too decentralized for me. I don't know. I enjoyed it. I think, especially if the application is not too big, I would probably opt in using the component store. But it's more like of a taste problem for me rather than I'm too used with to writing reducers and actions and everything. But
Got it.
I do really get the appeal of the component store.
Yeah. So for all the listeners who are out there, so NGRX, there are a few courses which Armen has helped us to publish. So on this is Angular's publication. So there is NGRX course and there is Rxjs fundamental course. You can also go through those. They have nice examples and the theory which Armen mentioned, right, which is important to understand. So you can go through this course as well. You can find the link. I'll add that into the description later on, and you can refer that. Yep. So let's discuss more about this Rxjs, right? So I have seen other developers like talking about that Rxjs is probably not the best library out there, but I have seen there are a lot of advantages once you actually understand it in a better way. So now we have talked about like what are the challenges developers face. Now, what are the things an existing developer who know Rxjs, right? So as a for example, me, I know a little bit of Rxjs. What can I do more to improve my knowledge in Rxjs?
That's a really good question because essentially we tend to forget that any problem in, for example, an Angular application, if we're discussing Angular, can be boiled down to the situation that we have a state of data, then that data changes somehow, and that needs to be reflected somewhere. So it's a sort of a triangle where we have a data, we have some event, then the data changes, then we have the UI of the application change. So most of the web development problems boil down to this. So usually what we do, if you imagine there is no Rxjs in the world, what we would do in an Angular application, we will have a method that does something triggered by an event from the UI. It will change some state, some properties in the class, maybe push something into array, remove something from somewhere, and then of course Angular will re-render. What's important to understand is the same concept. We can look at it like a stream. The event that came from the UI, it changed something, and then it got streamed somewhere. It seems like the template is kind of subscribed to the data, and the data is receiving events from the UI. It changes and then it updates the UI. So there are lots of situations when we can just take a look at how the data works. We can find the source of the data, turn it into an observable. uh, there are some situations, especially if you are using NGRX or something, when we already have some streams of data. Or for example, we have something coming from a WebSocket or from an HTTP call, which can all of those can be represented with observables. When we know in Angular, for example, HTTP client already uses observables, right? So what we can do, we can take those observables that already exist and see how they impact whatever we have in our application. So often something that happens is that we have some data coming from the backend. We put it in a property. We don't think in an Rxjs approach. We put it in some property. Maybe it's an array, for example. We display it in the UI, and then there is this method that pushes something into that stream of data, right? But this can become problematic if the method that pushes that data has lots of logic, and we also know that that data can potentially be changed from somewhere else. Some very different developer can write somewhere very different place in that component a piece of code that accidentally changes that array, the same array that we're working with. Now we've got a problem. We have to find out where is this change, and then we find the change. We need to understand why it is done. Is it on accident? Maybe it does something we don't know actually, and something like that. But we can go with the Rxjs approach. We can think about, well, we have this observable stream from the backend, and we have events stream from the UI. Why not combine those, for example, with some operator or function, depending on which one is important, and then derive the final array. I mean, the final state in our example, it's an array that will be used in the UI. We can do that with combining functions like combine latest, for example, and use the map operator, and take the new result, take whatever event came from the UI, like user clicked on something, so there is new data. We combine those streams, we use the map operator to put that into a new array that will be returned, and then we use the async pipe if you're in Angular. And the cool thing about it is that now no one can ever modify that array outside of our observable. Observables by default are immutable, right? So I cannot, in some other method, write a piece of code that will say, oh, change this observable's new value to something other, something different. So once you do that one time, once you realize one
Mhm.
of your problems is really fixable, and you actually write that in practice, use the async pipe, you will see that lots of problems boil down to this. So we can just break down all the logics, and we can think in terms of like one-way data flow. So here, my sources of data are maybe this event and this thing in the store. So I can take them, do my manipulations on them, and then display them someday. I don't have to worry that I would have a bug somewhere else. If there is a bug, then it's in that one observable that we are using with the async pipe. It's not anywhere else. It's not possible to be anywhere else. And once we do that one time, it becomes appealing, because also another big problem that lots of developers face is sometimes in a component, they really try hard to keep some two different pieces of data synchronized. Like if I change this array, for example, I need to also change this other one because they have a dependency on each other in some way. I'm struggling to come up with an example, but uh, I think almost anyone has faced that problem while doing.
Filters, probably filters,
Yeah.
right? One drop down selected, and then another drop down, which depends upon the previous one.
Yes, yes, that's really a good example. And uh, if we don't use Rxjs for situations like this, we'll end up trying to keep those two different pieces of data synchronized. Oh, and one day someone is going to forget, or someone new to the project, to the code base, will not know that, oh, updating this also means you have to go update this other thing too. Maybe if you push something into that array, make sure that this other array is also updated. But you don't have problems with synchronization in Rxjs. Just make those two things, if they're interdependent, if you need to come up with this one single result from both, you can combine them. If one is a transformed state of the other one, you can use the map operator to like have two observables. If you need to check some value before changing one piece of data, you can use, for example, with latest from operator, and check on the last
Mhm.
value that the other one emitted. So doing experiments like this, you can find initially you can find very easy situations when you can kind of transform your code to use Rxjs. Then you will find more and more increasingly difficult scenarios that really become simple when you think about them in the Rxjs terms.
Nice. So the important thing is practice. So practice more to become better at RxJS.
Yeah, definitely. And what I really liked to do was that I would just try out operators, as I mentioned previously. I would just think, oh, this is an operator I don't know. Let's read about it. Some operators are hard to understand from reading the documentation. They are better visualized with either the marble diagrams. Really, learn to read marble diagrams. Sorry. Um, they are really cool. They explain most of the operators really clearly, and
Yeah.
they're very simple. So if you take a look at the marble diagram and you kind of get how the operator works, just try it out. Maybe open something on StackBlitz, try it out on an operator, and you may even realize a real life scenario where you can use that operator.
Yeah. Cool. So there are a few questions. One from David. Let's see. So I think so. I have a library that makes calls to its own backend and returns value that must be used by application that uses my library. Is it right to write pipe map to do some functional to bring my response to model? I must be give okay. I must give to application, and after that, the app will subscribe to the caller. It must receive response without change. So I think this is first question. Or
Uh,
can I call the backend? Okay, so I think there are two scenarios. He's trying to understand which is better. So second scenario is, can I call the backend, take response, and after that give it to application? Is there a good way of doing so? Uh, is not right. I must only take value from my lib subscribing to call in a library. Okay, so he's trying to understand which is better approach, like having another library which makes the call to the backend, gives the data back as a observable, and we render the
yeah.
data, or like removing that library and then just directly calling it from application and then taking the data. So which approach you will prefer? I think David, just let me know if this is not the question you have, but yeah, let's go ahead.
The thing that is really interesting in this situation is that even if I take any value that is coming from another source, let's say in this example it's a backend application, so we have an API, it sends us values. I don't know about the structure of this library, but one can imagine there are functions and methods and properties exposed to the end user. So you can expose, for example, a unified stream of all the values you have, for example. Or you can maybe write a function that takes a callback or something and returns a slice of that data, maybe filtering on a message name, for example, if we have a WebSockets data or something else. So we can have multiple observables. This is the kind of approach that, for example, NGRX has. NGRX doesn't. I
Yeah.
think we can take the stream of the entire state, but it's not encouraged because we usually don't need this whole huge object. We need the slice of it. So it exposes a
Mhm.
function called select, right? So we can pass a selector function, which is just a callback that maps the big state to something local that we need here. So this is an approach you can take if you have a library that exposes different values as observable strings. About part of the question was, is it right to call like dot pipe and use operators? It's always the right approach. If you don't want to lose the original data, you can expose that observable, but you can also expose observables that are derived from it. Like if you have the entire data, you can expose the observables with something called data. And then if you want to expose some slice of it that is related to, for example, the users feature, for example, of the application, you can write a pipe map, select whatever you want from the state that is related to this feature, expose another observable. Though all of those observables will really be dependent on this big observable that is also exposed. So I don't think it's a problem. I would probably do something like that if I was writing a service or a class that is going to be used in another application. I think it's a good approach.
So, Armin, we just have reached to the end of the session, and the last question I have for you is, what are your resources to learn Rxjs or become better at Rxjs?
Uh, so usually I go to the documentation because most of it contains nearly everything you need to know in the basic sense. There are also lots of articles out there. Outside of whatever I have written, I really enjoyed. It's not really uh, connected to Rxjs, but I really strongly suggest to read. Uh, it was a series of article by Owen. I forgot the name of the Eric Siemens, if I
Uh-huh.
remember correctly. Sorry if I. It was called "Composing Software Functional Programming in JavaScript." So it's a list of series of articles. It's on Medium, I believe. They're really good at understanding the functional programming side. Once you get a grasp of that, everything else will be just practice, just learning new operators. You already know how the whole concept works. And for the operators, you can use lots of resources. You can take a look at my articles. You can take a look at the Rxjs fundamentals course. Also, there was the learnrxjs.io website I used like a couple of years ago. It was really nice because it showed like hierarchies of operators. How are they connected together? For example, there is buffer, and then it would say that how. Yeah, Lars reminds me. It was Eric Elliott. Thanks. um, so uh, that's most of the resources that I usually use when dealing with Rxjs.
Great. So I think Akash has a question which is more on change direction, how understanding change direction. So I think Akash, that is like a huge topic to discuss about, and we are almost at the end of the session. But in case you have questions, I think you can post it on Twitter, and I think a lot of people will reply with the links. I mean, there are so many blogs available to, available to for this, and you can get that help. And Neil has a question, so I think we can just take it quickly. So Neil has a question that what is the fundamental difference between subject and behavior subject, apart from setting up initial value in behavior subject?
Well, the big difference is that subject doesn't keep the value at all.
Yeah.
It's the difference is not that we give an initial value to behavior subject, but really is that it has any consistent value at all. Subjects are just kind of like observables and observers. You can send a value with subject, not and read a value from a subject. So in one place you send, in other place you receive. But behavior subject is a subject, but it keeps the last value. You can get it with the get value function. So it's useful if you sometimes need to inspect what the last value was in your code, other than subscribing to it. In the case of subject, you can only subscribe to it like a visual
Mm-hmm.
observable.
Oh, cool. So I think that's it for the day, Armin. So last question for you. Do you want to promote anything on the channel?
Uh, I forgot that there was going to be a question like this, so I don't have anything in my mind.
No problem.
uh,
So
no, you can
anyways, so
if
yeah,
yeah, if I try to help everyone with especially with Rxjs and NGRX. I enjoy it, so you can follow me on Twitter, ask me questions anytime. I will try to be of help. So I guess that's it.
yeah, that's really great. So, any in case you have any questions related to RxJS, I mean, Armin has a great knowledge about it, and feel free to reach out to him, as I said, on Twitter, and he'll be more than happy to help you. And that's it for the day. We'll be back with another episode on um, uh, again in this week, and we will be talking about Blazor. If I'm not wrong, yeah, yeah, it's Blazor, and see you then. I mean, see you again this week, and that's it for the day. Bye bye. Thanks for
Thank
joining.
you, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Simon. Thanks for your time as well.
Thanks for having me.